Using generative AI tools, such as ChatGPT, requires a different type of thinking than we use in everyday life. In this video, I'm going to talk about some of my thoughts that have developed over the past year about how to use generative AI effectively and ethically in teaching and learning. My work in this began by looking at the bias in ChatGPT specifically and eventually other language models as well. What I did is I gave ChatGPT a description of a student, such as this student comes from a Black family or this student comes from a white family. I then gave it a random writing passage and asked it to grade and give feedback on that passage. I used the same passage every single time, only varying the student description, and I did it a whole bunch of times to get averages. Strangely enough, just by giving it a race, it gives a higher average score. In this chart right here, you can see Black was just a little bit higher than white, but not significantly so. However, ChatGPT 4 that we've done more recently actually shows Black an even higher, significantly higher score. But then when we look at something like inner city public school and elite private school, variables that traditionally are similar to Black and white, we get a more expected response that we're going to have a lower score from the inner city public school than the elite private school. Strangely enough, this changes by the model and the date. It's not consistent. It gets better, it gets worse. We can't rely on it always being the same. Another experiment I did was I told it that this student likes classical music and this student likes rap music. So you can see here that in ChatGPT 3.5, which is the free version, classical music student received a significantly higher score than the student that I said liked rap music. It wasn't significant in GPT-4 or Gemini, but other experiments have shown that if I hide the description within the writing passage itself, it actually is significant in these other models. And randomly, I took my alma mater, Brigham Young University, and its rival, University of Utah, and I told it that this writing passage was from a student at Brigham Young University, this one was from University of Utah, did that a whole bunch of times, and lucky for me, Brigham Young University had a higher average score. So what is this thing that shows these weird biases that change, that aren't always what we expect? Some have called this an alien intelligence. It's a different type of intelligence that we've ever worked with. Punya Mishra has come up with a lot of different things to explore it, calling it a smart drunk intern, emphasizing that it has to hallucinate or make up fake stuff in order to be creative and useful, that it's weird, it's white, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, and that it's a bullshit artist. And bullshit is a technical term that means it's really good at making stuff up and sounding like it's not. Because of this, it requires new ways of thinking and acting. And as students are beginning to use these in schools and teachers are using it, it's important we help them develop these skills. So I've outlined 4 skills that I think are important when we use these, especially in teaching and learning. The first is to be human-directed, to practice active engagement, collaborative exploration, and creative discovery. I'll just a little bit more about each of these. Human-directed means that we're going to use AI with intention, and we're going to avoid passive interactions. So we're going to use it purposefully with a purpose, and I'm not going to let it just tell me stuff and mindlessly believe it. If I was a student who told it that I like rap music, and then I just accepted the type of language that it was customizing to me that assumes that I'm less than the classical music fan, that would affect my identity and such. So it's important that I'm being active and purposeful. Here's a quick example of this. I was using Duolingo to work on Spanish and I wasn't getting the explanations I needed. So I just took a screenshot of the problem that I kept missing and asked it to explain it. As it explained it, I thought, does that match? Oh yes, that clarifies the thinking. And then I asked it to give me more examples. I asked me to quiz me on it, give me examples, and give me feedback on my responses. So I was using it very purposefully for my use. The next is active engagement. We want to use metacognition, skepticism, and reflection. There's been a lot of talk about how AI is often wrong, and it is. It's a bullshit artist, right? That's where the skepticism comes in. Just because it's wrong does not mean it's not useful. It can still spur our thinking, but we don't read it with the acceptance of the fact. We use it to spur a type of thinking. This requires reflection and metacognition on our interactions with it. One way to do this when you're learning to interact is to actually review the conversations you've had with the AI and look for patterns and how you're thinking and how you might think differently. I did this the other day with an experiment I was doing. I actually screen recorded myself interacting with ChatGPT, and I talked aloud about my thoughts while I did it. And then I went back and I watched the video, and you can see on the bottom here, these little bubbles here are things that I noticed in my own thinking and my interactions, such as when I assumed that it was telling me accurate stuff, instead of using that information to spur my own thinking. The next is collaborative exploration. One of the most powerful uses of generative AI is actually to support human conversations. We can use it to exchange ideas, enhance relationships when we're doing it with humans. Here's an idea that came from Sarah Dillard on Twitter, thinking about the strategy of think, pair, share as adding ChatGPT to the mix. So when a teacher asks a question, first students think about it, then they talk with a neighbor. And then this is slightly different than what she has written, but I think of the pair going together to ChatGPT and talking to ChatGPT about it. That allows the pair to have that discussion and notice the difference between talking to the human, talking to the AI, and how they're going to integrate those ideas. And then finally, sharing their observations with the rest of the class. Finally is creative discovery, experiment, and play. When you work with AI models, take a mindset of curiosity, of I wonder what would happen if I did this. That helps us come to understand the nature of these interactions and be more mindful about them. Random example, you can see it on my blog. I took this mathematical principle called Benford's Law, and I played with it to see if the pattern held in ChatGPT. And you'll have to go to my blog to get the details on that. But it was a way for me to enrich my understanding of this principle and AI at the same time, and just kind of was curious about it. So a few tips about ways to use AI that enact these principles. We've heard a lot about prompt writing. It's how we start a conversation or ask an AI to do something for us. And there's a skill to effective prompt writing, although if you look at Ethan Mollick's writing, he emphasizes that you don't have to be a really good prompt writer to be able to use ChatGPT, but it is helpful if you're going to want to get a very consistent response and get exactly what you want. So for me, prompting is primarily about clarifying your ideas and your purpose behind things, that first principle of being human-directed. When you're writing a prompt, start by telling it who it should be. The default is usually that it's going to be a helpful assistant. But if you want it to act, say, as a speech-language pathologist, then ask it to be that. That'll change the source of vocabulary it's going to use in its response, and it might be more useful to you. With that, you should give it context. Tell it why you want to do this, what your purpose is. That'll help it be more effective. Another thing is to emphasize the purpose of what you're doing and why it's important. Some recent studies have suggested that if you use emotional words like how important something is to you, you tend to get a better response, a higher quality response. So why not tell it that your life depends on the answer, because you might get a better answer that way. Another thing that I like to do is ask it to help me write the prompt. So I will say, I want to write a prompt that will consistently get you to answer this way. How can I do this? And it'll help me with that. I even wrote a prompt to help create prompts, and it has actually helped me create some more consistent things for when I need that consistent response. All right, some possible uses that fit with this framework. First, brainstorming. One thing that I recently noticed is that if I just ask for one idea about something, it gives me something quite generic. But if I ask it for multiple options or multiple answers, I get something much better because it has to reach, just like we have to reach when we come up with a lot of ideas for something. So when you're brainstorming, try to ask it to give you 5 examples or 5 responses or 5 words, and it'll reach a little bit beyond the generic that way. Ask for feedback. That can be on your writing or text. I took a picture of my Christmas cookies and asked for feedback about how I could improve them, feedback on your ideas. Again, remembering that it's not necessarily telling me the truth. I'm going to be skeptical and I'm going to use what it says as a launching point for my own thoughts and reflections. You can ask it to summarize something. For example, a research article, knowing that it might be adding little things in there that aren't actually in the article, but it gives me a starting point for my thinking that then when I look at the article in more detail, it'll help me understand it better. Some people I know have always also used this if they're a native speaker. For example, if they're a native Spanish speaker and they need to read something in English, they can get a Spanish summary first, and that just helps them guide them when they're reading it in English. You can ask it to review and quiz, like I showed with that Spanish exercise. If you upload actual content and actual study guide, you're going to increase the likelihood that it's going to be drawing on the correct information in what it's doing, but always keeping that skeptical mind, making sure it matches with what you remember, and if you're not sure, looking it up. And explain errors like I showed. Role play, this is one of my favorites. If I'm going in to ask for a raise, I can ask it to pretend like it's my boss and help me practice having that conversation. I can also ask it for feedback on how I did in that conversation, knowing it might be sort of generic feedback, but it can provide a springboard for my own thinking about how I did. Image creation is a popular one, knowing that there's going to be bias embedded in the images. And then anything else you can think of. People are coming up with new ideas all the time. Don't be afraid to play with it and just kind of get used to how it operates. Overall, remember, it's weird. It's a stranger. It's a unique type of intelligence you've never interacted with before and requires different skills, such as being human-directed, having active engagement, collaborative exploration, and creative discovery. Thanks for watching.